The issue is not that it's incapable. The capabilities are there. The issue is that those capabilities are not being deployed against the Israelis. Those capabilities are being deployed against the people. Because as the map stands right now, the borders of Greater Israel span from Sirt in the west to Abu Dhabi in the east. We talk about boycott. There are Muslim nations setting their imams loose like rabid dogs on their population to say to their population, how dare you boycott without the permission of the ruler? Palestine is going to be free. I am absolutely certain of that.
Over the last 20 months, the Palestinians have been calling time and time again on the Ummah to come to its aid. But they've also lamented the fact that Ummah has not been able to end the genocide. So what is this Ummah? Why is Palestine supposedly so important to it? And why has it been unable, or maybe sometimes unwilling, to end the genocide in Gaza? To discuss these questions and more, I'm joined today by Sami Hamdi, Managing Director of the International Interest. Thank you for joining us, Sami.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, I think maybe we'll start with a simpler question. What is the Ummah?
I think the simple answer is that the Ummah is composed of everybody who believes in La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. I think the Ummah is a concept that transcends modern day national boundaries. It transcends ethnicities. The Ummah is based on a bond that meant that when companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went to Abyssinia, there was an omission from this delegation, which was an Abyssinian himself called Bilal ibn Rabah, who believed that his bond to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was more important to him than the ethnic bond that binded him to a homeland or a home country. For him, home was where the people of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah resided. I think that the Ummah is rooted in a bond that means that when Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi is stuck in his battle against Richard the Lionheart and the Crusaders that come, it's an Armenian general who gets on a boat from Egypt in order to go and help to relieve the siege and provide the urgently supplies, while his army is composed of Arabs, Kurds and the like, all of which are sitting together as one brotherhood. And when you look at the army, it's always described as a Muslim army. You have to dig deep in order to discover that they're actually composed of various different ethnicities. I think the concept of an ummah and why we talk about an ummah of 2 billion is because that bond that ties this ummah together, this body of people together, is one in which we're in modern day where we talk about national interests and the like. For this ummah, this bond transcends national interests by which Palestine today, if we use it as an example, is just as relevant to a Muslim sitting in Palestine itself and a Muslim sitting in New York, in Argentina, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and in Australia, by virtue of the bond that underlines this ummah, that transcends kin, that transcends the ethnicity. And I think that is what we talk about when we talk about an ummah, and it's why whenever we talk about political issues, we always bring up the ummah, because there's an expectation that because of that bond, we should rely on that bond to deliver political solutions to the crises that we have today.
And why is Palestine supposedly important to this ummah?
I think first and foremost, there is the fact that Palestine itself, Al-Aqsa itself, the capital of Palestine, I don't believe in this East and West Jerusalem border that they're trying to create. It's important to remember that it is the site in which the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ascended to the 7 heavens. It is that portal, that connection to the 7 heavens. It is also the place where he led all of the prophets in prayer, whether it's Moses, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Noah, whether it's all of these others, or Nuh, Isa and Musa and the like, depending on who's listening to this podcast, just to show the common names. It's the coming together of all of the religions of the past into one final religion of Islam. Islam came to rectify what was changed in the religions beforehand. It's a reiteration of the message of Jesus, message of Moses, in order to bring it together. And that amalgamation took place not only in Mecca itself, where the wahi came down, or the revelation came down to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the Palestine itself is the reaffirmation that Islam is the extension, it's the final form of all the religions that came before. The second dynamic is that Palestine is also an issue for the broader humanity, not just for the ummah itself. It's a colonized territory, a colonized area. It's an area where people are being denied their basic right to live on land that they belong to. They are not immigrants to this land, they're indigenous to this land, and random Europeans turned up and decided that they wanted to take that land from them on the basis of what they claimed to be a promise made thousands of years ago. And the ones who made the claim that they'd been given a promise were people who don't even believe in the entity that gave them that promise. Herzl himself was an atheist in and of itself. I think that Palestine is relevant insofar as it disturbs the natural order of how human beings are supposed to operate. It is a symbol of justice. It is a cause that inspires people to fight against injustice. And as a result, every human being on this earth that has that inclination towards justice naturally gravitates towards Palestine. And the final point I will mention on this, with regards to the importance of Palestine itself, is the fact that when you look at what is unfolding in Palestine and even the history of Palestine itself, Palestine was the epitome and the example of how the religions could all live together. There are three areas that whenever you study anthropology, they point to three cities that are considered the epitome of coexistence in a world in which that is being riven by ideologies and the like. Those three cities are Andalusia, when the Muslims ruled it; Sarajevo, when the Muslims ruled it. Sarajevo was called the Jerusalem of Europe. And the third was Jerusalem. The idea being that the Muslims, or rather the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, created an equilibrium such whereby when the Crusaders came in, they massacred Christians, Jews, and Muslims. When the Zionists came in, they turfed out the Muslims. When the Muslims came in, they created a haven in which everybody could live together, and it became a model that not even the cities of the West today were able to replicate. And therefore, Palestine, when people talk about it, is how do we revive that once more? How do we revive what was a jewel with regards to the history of humanity? And I think that's why Palestine means so much.
Now, the Ummah, as you said, has this intimate bond of sorts, and Palestine is extremely important to the Ummah for multiple reasons. You mentioned religious reasons as well as human reasons, justice reasons. Why is this Ummah incapable of doing what it needs to do to help the Palestinians?
That's a heavy question. I think that if we were to put it quite briefly, I think it's important to emphasize that this is a traumatized Ummah. I think that sometimes we fall under the trap of forgetting that less than 100 years ago, over 50% of the Ummah was under colonization, colonized by foreign powers. And each of these colonized countries fought a very bitter independence war in order to achieve the gains that they made or they have today. I think as a result of disturbing the colonial global order, remember Palestine, the Palestinian mandate was, and the League of Nations that asked for the partition of Palestine, was made by a body that was composed of 6 colonial powers. It wasn't a United Nations per se. It was called League of Nations, but it was composed of all the colonial powers. I think that we forget sometimes that in that trauma of the independence that came out, the colonial powers, although they were kicked out physically, they did not desire to leave the area to those who had kicked them out. We saw, for example, that the French, who were kicked out physically in Tunisia, were able to make a deal with Bourguiba, the Tunisian president, over the borders of Tunisia. And Tahir Belkhoja, who was his interior minister, later wrote in his memoirs that Bourguiba had urgently pressed the French to try to find an agreement with the borders, because he said, I want to do it before Algeria becomes independent, because I don't want to talk to Algeria about the borders. I want to agree with you on the borders, because Algeria won't let me take this territory, and this territory. The idea being that physically they left, but we still had people who were keen to keep those ties with those colonial powers in order to repress the people that they had fought to liberate, because they believed that now that you have a new terrain whereby now you have to negotiate with your own people, I'd rather negotiate with the colonizer that I've kicked out than negotiate with my people who are now treating me as equals. I think that the colonizers left physically, but there were means by which colonizers sought to maintain their presence in the region, whether it's under the Cold War, where Americans would be invited in to resist the Russians, Russians would be invited in order to resist the Americans. I think in that trauma and in that struggle that is taking place, I think the Ummah went from resisting colonizers to resisting dictators, resisting colonizers to resisting brutal regimes that would use the history of independence in order to legitimize authoritarian rule, when in reality the people had fought for freedom. They secured freedom from the colonizer only to find it denied with the authoritarian regimes that would come later and deny them those freedoms. In other words, they were caught out of the fire and into the frying pan. I know the saying is the opposite, but I want to say that the colonizer is the fire, the frying pan is the authoritarian regimes, and it's about how do you get out of the frying pan. So when you ask why is the ummah incapable, I call it a traumatized ummah because I think that the generation that fought for independence, the subsequent generation sort of said, well, the independence battle was fought before, there's a bit of fatigue, let's see where things go. And the next generation said, we fought and still we're in the same situation. There's sort of, why do we need to keep fighting? Arab Spring comes and suddenly there's a counter Arab Spring that took place. I remember being in Tunisia in 2019, where you had people who did the revolution. They were in the protest in Sidi Bouzid that launched the revolution, who would grab their trousers and rip and say, I'm poorer than I ever was before. Damn this wretched revolution that I did. There's a sense of no matter what we do, the situation seems to be getting worse, even though objectively it's not. I think that if you look at the ummah as a traumatized ummah, you can understand why it's not the sort of situation where they don't want to do anything for Palestine. It's more, I'm also colonized as well. There was a protest in Egypt by a bunch of journalists and lawyers where they said, Palestine, we are sorry, we are also colonized here in Egypt. And I think when you look at the Sumud convoy that left from Algeria and Tunisia in order to go to break the siege in Gaza, for those who don't know, the Sumud convoy was a group of more than 1,700 activists who gathered and said, we're going to march to Gaza to force a break in the siege and deliver aid ourselves. They expected opposition at the border with Gaza and expected opposition from the Israelis. They expected the Israelis to frustrate them. Instead, they found that when they got to Sirte, the middle of Libya, it was Haftar who frustrated them and refused to let them pass. When they flew over Haftar and got to Cairo, they found it wasn't Zionist Israelis who were preventing them from marching. It was Egyptians who had hired other Egyptians from Ismailiyah to go and beat up those people who were going into Rafah itself, indicating that the first line of defense of the Israelis is not actually Israel itself, or what they call Israel. The first line of defense are these authoritarian regimes who made deals with the colonizers in order to repress their own people, because although they fought for the freedom against the colonizer, they later felt that we didn't want to give freedom to the people. They wanted to be the ones to manifest that freedom themselves, which is why when you look at post-independent states, you'll find that in reality, many of the countries have only had 2 or 3 presidents, despite the fact that America or the UK has seen prime minister after prime minister or president after president, because we went out of the fire and into the frying pan itself. The final point worth mentioning on this issue about why is the ummah incapable. It's not that the ummah is incapable. The ummah has all the capabilities to go and liberate Palestine. The ummah has the populations, the finances, the resources, the armies, everything. The issue is not that it's incapable. The capabilities are there. The issue is that those capabilities are not being deployed against the Israelis. Those capabilities are being deployed against the people. When you look at, for example, when Trump went to visit Saudi Arabia, I should have emphasized before I start, the views expressed here are my own. I know they don't reflect yours or anybody here. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I do know that these days anybody who mentions Saudi Arabia or the like, there's a fear they won't be able to do Umrah and Hajj again. But in any case,
I've already given up on that. In
any case, inshallah, Allah allows it to happen. When Trump went to Saudi Arabia and to UAE and to Qatar, he came back with promises of $3.4 trillion in terms of investment. The reason why they gave the $1 trillion investment, and I want to put this into context. Can you imagine if Trump, so the story goes that Trump was, we all saw it on the cameras, Trump was sitting in the White House and they said to him, Mr. President, where will your first foreign visit be? And he said, usually, traditionally, it's supposed to be to the UK, where we're recording here. But he said, last time, the Saudis offered me $450 billion if I agreed to go to Riyadh first. If they offer me $450 billion, I probably won't go because now there's inflation. But if they offer me $500 billion or something more, maybe I will go. The Saudis called and said, let's make it, a nice, wholesome figure of $1 trillion. When Trump goes to visit Saudi Arabia, and I want to put this into context, if Trump had said to China, give me $1 trillion and I'll visit Beijing, what do you think the Chinese would have said? They would have said, what the hell are you talking about? Get out of here. What do you mean give you $1 trillion? What do we look like? We're a dignified power. We're a Powerhouse. Not America. We're not going to pay you to come and visit us. We don't need you. You come with us with dignity or nothing. If he had said to the EU, to Germany, give me $1 trillion and I'll come and visit Berlin, the Germans would have said, we are the Germans. We don't need to give you $1 trillion. We are a people with dignity. We don't do that. If he had said to Macron, French president, and said to him, give me $1 trillion. I'm going to go to the UK, but I'm willing to go to Paris. I'm thinking about it. Give me $1 trillion and I'll come to Paris and I'll bring my businessmen with me. What do you think Macron would have said? He said, what is this behavior? Like, there's no way I'm giving you $1 trillion so you can come to Paris. The only people in the world who would, even Brazil wouldn't do it. The only people in the world are the Gulf states.
Could it not be argued that they did that to show that Trump can be bought?
I don't think you pay $1 trillion is enough to rescue Egypt from all of its financial woes. $1 trillion is enough to rescue Tunisia and rebuild the entire country. Tunisia's budget is about 23, 24 billion. Maybe it's 30 billion now. 1 trillion, just to give you the comparison, $1 trillion is enough to build a railway from Morocco all the way to Cairo. $1 trillion is enough to, all those poor people that you see in Egypt who are barely making ends meet. It's enough to establish a welfare program that can elevate the Egyptians out of poverty, to enable them to think more than just their day-to-day things. I'll give you an example. I've told this story before, but I really enjoyed it. I was in New Jersey with this Egyptian friend of mine. He's American Egyptian, and he had studied in Azhar for a while. So I told him, well, how was your experience like in Azhar? And I remember he said to me, one day I got into, Sami, one thing that I couldn't stand when I went there, because I was born and raised in America. He goes, I hated that every time I got into a taxi, the meters would never be working, like never. So he goes, one day I got so angry, I got in the taxi and I asked the taxi driver, I told him, why is the taxi meter not working? He said the Egyptian taxi driver had a cigarette in his hand, so he blows into the cigarette. And he looks at me and he goes, it bothers you, doesn't it? So he says, of course it bothers me. He goes, it bothers you. يعني أنت مش مرتاح وأنا مش مرتاح. You're not relaxed and I'm not relaxed. He said, you're not relaxed because you don't know how much you're going to pay for this taxi journey. I'm not relaxed because I don't know if you're going to pay the price that I'm going to charge you. So we're going to spend this whole taxi journey thinking only about the price of this taxi journey. Then he takes another swig of his cigarette. Then the brother says to him, my friend says to him, what's your point? So he says to him, imagine if the meter was working. Imagine if it was in order. You'd be relaxed and I'd be relaxed. You'd be relaxed because you know how much you're paying, and I'd be relaxed because I know how much I'm getting. He goes, what's your point? He goes, so because you're relaxed, you won't be looking at the meter, you'll be looking outside the window. When you look outside the window, you'll start observing. You'll start looking at things because you're relieved. You'll start looking. As you start observing, you'll start noticing things. And as you start noticing things, we'll start talking about what we're noticing. And as we're observing, we'll start seeing things that are wrong, and we'll start pointing out and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong. And once we start talking about it, we'll start talking about why is it wrong? Why is it that these things are wrong? And then, my friend, we'll start talking about how can we fix it. And when we start talking about that, my dear friend, revolution. You see, my friend, that's why they make sure the meter is broken, is to make sure we're unable to focus on all these other different things and the like. The point that I'm saying is that $1 trillion can elevate all these people out of a state in which they're all focused on the broken taxi meter. The reason why it's not about showing Trump getting bought is because that $1 trillion, when Trump came, the Saudis had 3 demands. You were talking about the Ummah, is it incapable and the like. Saudis had 3 demands. The Americans were going there expecting that the first demand would be ceasefire in Gaza and the Israelis have to withdraw. Bob Woodward writes in his book that when Blinken went to visit Saudi Arabia, he was terrified that the Gulf states were about to lambast him and he was bracing himself for it. And Bob Woodward writes that when Blinken arrived, he was stunned to find that the Gulf states instead were saying, yo, you're after Hamas, go for it. Like we don't have any problem with this whatsoever. We just ask that you help to make it be easier for us because our people are a bit angry about it. We're going to let them make some dua in Palestine and the like, but it might be a bit complicated. Just make sure you do it quickly. When Trump arrives in Saudi Arabia, he doesn't hear Gaza. What he hears is, Mr. President, I'm offering you $1 trillion to show you my commitment to America. I'm not going China. I'm showing you my commitment to the American economy and also to your family specifically. I was not willing to give this to Biden. But in exchange, Mr. President, in 2019, when the Houthis and the pro-Iran militias in Iraq fired missiles at the royal palace and at Jeddah and at my oil facilities, you didn't do anything about it. I expected you to do something about it. You didn't. I want you to guarantee me a security pact against the Iranians. That's what I want. I'm giving you $1 trillion. I'm going to buy Patriot missiles. I'm going to buy weapons and the like. My first demand, Mr. President, is help me to push back against these wretched Iranians, his words, not mine, that have taken over the government in Iraq, in Baghdad, via the militias, Hashd al-Sha'bi, the Popular Mobilization Force, that Obama in his JCPOA allowed them to be incorporated in the Iraqi army, which is why they didn't like the JCPOA. They didn't like the political dimension of it. I want you, the Houthis have frustrated me in the south. I want you to promise me that you'll bomb the Houthis. There was a report that suggested that when the Israelis bombed the Houthis, the Saudis had given intelligence to the Americans and the Israelis about where the Houthi leadership might be in order to say, finally you're doing something, go and take them out. The first demand was not Gaza. The first demand was, I'll give you $1 trillion. I'll give you money if you promise to protect me. I will give you jizya. I will give you $1 trillion if you promise to give me a NATO-style security pact against the Iranians. Biden said he can't get it through Congress, but he was about to allow the Fifth Fleet to incorporate the Hashd Defense Set. Mr. Trump, I'm giving you $1 trillion. You need to give me more than that. Second, Mr. Trump, okay, what is it, Mohammed bin Salman? Is it Gaza? No. My second demand, as a result of the antagonism of Biden and the antagonism of the American Congress, and as a result of what I did to Khashoggi, and as a result of my crackdown on people here in Saudi Arabia, companies are unwilling to invest in Saudi Arabia. They're setting up in the UAE, hoping they can do business via UAE into Saudi Arabia. I passed a law in which companies had to open up in Saudi Arabia itself, but many companies are not opening up in Saudi Arabia itself. And I need you, Mr. Trump, to openly celebrate what I'm doing here in Saudi Arabia so that companies can say, I am the future, so they can finally come and pump money in. I'm a geopolitical risk consultant. That's my job. When clients come and ask me about Saudi Arabia, and I ask them, what is it that makes you hesitate about Saudi Arabia? They actually don't say it has anything to do with the human rights record. I remember one of the biggest companies in France, when we were sitting together, I remember they said, to be honest, the Khashoggi and human rights stuff, we don't really give a damn about it. Like, we do business in many countries that have poor human rights record.
United States.
Exactly. That's a good example. But they said in Saudi Arabia, our issue is not to do with human rights. Our issue is, we don't like the fact that the Saudi Crown Prince can wake up in a bad mood and just shut down a project. He said in the UAE, at least they have the free zones, and bin Zayed doesn't touch the free zones. It's English common law. It's whatever, he doesn't interfere in it. We know there's a sense of certainty. We don't like the fact that the Saudi Crown Prince can wake up, he doesn't like somebody, he takes the contract of him, and that project starts stalling. We're not willing to waste money in that regard, and until he gives us some sense of certainty and framework and stability in that regard, there's no way we're going to invest in Saudi Arabia. In any case, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says to Trump, my second demand, in exchange for the $1 trillion, your question was, why is the Ummah incapable? I'm telling you, I'm trying to show where the Ummah is putting its efforts. The Saudi Crown Prince says that the second demand is, I want you to publicly come out and celebrate that we are the ones who are innovating. And sure enough, Trump in his speech, he said, when we leave these guys alone, look what they build. Their cities are amazing, he said. The third demand, Mr. President, is that given that Iran has a nuclear program, and I think that they're developing a nuclear weapon, and given that you, Mr. Trump, are unwilling to go and attack the Iranians, even though we want you to, even though you are unwilling to go and bomb their nuclear program, even though you are not listening to the Israelis who are asking you and begging you to please bomb their nuclear program, if you're going to allow Iran to have a nuclear program, because they're going to hoodwink you, if you're going to allow Iran to have a nuclear program, Mr. President, we want a nuclear weapon as well. We want a nuclear technology as well. He says you're not allowed to have a bomb. He says, but we want access to nuclear technology for civilian purposes that we can later turn into a bomb. Mohammed bin Salman famously said in the Fox News interview, if Iran has a bomb, we have to have a bomb as well. There's no way like we're allowing it, etc. When the press asks, is Gaza mentioned? That's when the Saudis go, oh, by the way, yeah, Gaza. Gaza. Like, just sort it out. My point is that it's not that the Ummah is incapable. 1 trillion is a lot of money. 1 trillion could have got a ceasefire in Gaza. The problem is that when Trump left Saudi Arabia with a promise of 1 trillion, you asked where the Ummah's capabilities are. And you might say that I'm only talking about Saudi Arabia. UAE told Trump, ta'ala come. And they got these ladies, they told them, take off your hijab, and I want you to wave yours and wave your head the way that Quraysh used to do before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Message, the Risala by Mustafa Aqad, Allah yarahmu. There is a scene when Wahshi is being introduced to Hind bint Utbah, Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan. and she's looking for somebody to kill Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet, radiallahu an. So they bring a dancing girl swishing her hair, and they put the ring on top of her hair, and they tell Wahshi, throw your javelin, and he gets the javelin to go through that circle over there. That dancing thing is a pre-Islamic, concept. UAE lines up these 20, 30 girls for Donald Trump, and they swing their hair as Trump is passing by. Why? The UAE say that if Saudi Arabia is going to give $1 trillion to Trump, they're giving it to him so that they can wield the White House in their favor to get security, and also wield the White House. I don't like bin Salman too much, bin Zayed says. I don't like bin Salman too much because me and him are disagreeing on Yemen. We disagree on the geographic borders. UAE is trying to take more land. Saudi is now complaining to the United Nations. Saudi reconciled with Qatar without consulting me. Bin Salman went to Doha and went and reconciled with Emir Tamim without consulting me. I didn't want the reconciliation. And then he dragged me into reconciliation as well. I want to control Saudi. We're brothers with Saudi. We're equals. We're not. And I remember the last time I ever went to Saudi Arabia was 2014, before bin Salman became a powerhouse. So I remember we went to the King Abdulaziz Museum, and the guide who was with me, he was an advisor in the Ministry of Interior. We go to this big picture of King Abdulaziz, and he's sitting with somebody. So the guy looks at the picture and says to me, Sami, what do you notice about this picture? So I said to him, it's King Abdulaziz sitting with someone. He goes, who? I said, maybe it's the Emir of Bahrain. He goes, it's Emir of Bahrain. But what do you notice about the picture? I was like, they're sitting next to each other. They're brotherly nations. He goes, no. Look carefully. I was like, I don't know what you want from me, like Habib. Like they're sitting, both of them together, and mashallah, brotherly nation. He goes, no. The Emir of Bahrain is sitting lower than the King of Saudi Arabia because we are the big brother in the region. The UAE wants to sit on the same seat as Saudi Arabia. So UAE invite Trump and they tell him, how much did bin Salman give you? $1 trillion. I'll give you $1.4 trillion. And in exchange, don't listen to Mohammed bin Salman. And when I present my plan to split Sudan, to make a new state with Niala in the west as the capital, because my militia Himeti was unable to take the capital Khartoum, I want you to recognize it. When I split Libya into two, and Haftar now has set up his administration in Benghazi in the east, Biden was unwilling to recognize. I want you to recognize Haftar as an independent state, or at least give him respite until he's able to take Tripoli again and bring the whole country under his authoritarian regime. When I go to Somalia, I want you to help me to drive out the Turks. When I go into Yemen, I want to split Yemen into two. I want South Yemen to get recognition, and I want you to recognize that because the Saudis don't want to recognize a South Yemen. The Saudis want a united Yemen because they believe that if there is a split, then both countries will be antagonistic towards Saudi Arabia. In any case, bin Zayed says, I'll give you $1 trillion. That's where $2 trillion of the Ummah went. Then the third trillion went. The Qataris, they panicked. They said, Trump last time did a blockade on us. And Trump did it because Saudis and the UAE asked him. Now they've given him $2 trillion, or $2.4 trillion. If I let this go unchecked, they will convince him to blockade me again. And last time, even though I've got the largest US military base in the region, it didn't protect me from the last blockade. Trump told the troops to stand down while Saudi was about to invade, and then I had to really scramble and lobby and ask the Israelis to help me out in order to make sure that... So Qatar says, Ta'ala ya Trump, come. They're all expecting Gaza to be on the table. Instead, they find that the first 3-4 priorities are not Gaza. The Qataris, they say, how much did they give you? They gave you 1 trillion, 1.4. We'll give you 1.4 trillion and the Boeing 747, a palace in the skies. If you promise to agree that anything they ask you, you will let us know what they ask you so we can also be consulted as well. You asked, is the Ummah incapable? The Ummah is not incapable. The Ummah has $3.4 trillion that they're able to spend to develop the Ummah. The Ummah has the geographical capacity to prevent Israel from attacking the Iranians or prevent Israel from expanding in the region. The Ummah has the population, the armies, the resources, and the high-tech weaponry in order to do so. But the current leadership on the resources of this Ummah are deploying those resources to ensure protection of the regime against the people themselves. Because the fourth demand that was made to Trump in exchange for the 1 trillion was, in the words of the Saudi Crown Prince, there was, in 2018, I was invited to this closed-door meeting on maritime security. There was a US delegation, European Union delegation, and there was a Gulf delegation. And the idea was, where is the future of security in the maritime going? There was the second in command of the US forces in the Gulf sitting in the room, senior European diplomats and senior Gulf military representatives. So the US second in command is talking to us about his visit to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in 2018 with Mark Esper, who was Trump's defense secretary, where he says the Saudi Crown Prince told us something that floored us. No Saudi prince has ever said this to us before. We were like, what? He said to us that, listen, my people are... Islam is still the dominant influence in this country. And I need at least 25, 30 years before I can remove these influences or at least restrict it and relegate it to Mecca and Medina. I need your help with that. I need your universities. I need this and the like. Meaning what he was saying was, I need you guys to help me against who? Against my people. I need you to help me against the Ummah. I need you to help me deploy the resources of the Ummah against the Ummah, because the Ummah want to use those resources against you. But I would prefer your vision of how the world should be rather than the Ummah's vision of how the world should be. So you lot need to give me time and protect me from this Ummah that wants to use the Ummah's resources for the Ummah. I need you to protect me from the Ummah when I use the Ummah's resources against the Ummah itself. I'm giving you $1 trillion to guarantee me that if anything happens in Saudi Arabia, if anything happens in the UAE, you solemnly swear to send in your troops to rescue me from an ummah that is going to be very angry when it sees how I'm going to spend the resources of the ummah. And I finish it with the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he spoke about, everyone likes to quote the hadith that one day the enemies will come on you like they come on in a feast, like on a plate, they will all eat. And the Sahaba were really disturbed by it. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, will we be many on that day, or will it be because we're so few? Ya Rasulullah, they're asking him, will it be because we're weak, we're few, we don't have resources, or will we be many? Will we have resources to resist when it happens? And he said to them, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that you will be many on that day, but you'll be like the foam of the sea. And they said, what do you mean like the foam of the sea? He said, you'll be like the foam of the sea because your hearts will be afflicted with wahan and karahiyat al-maut. You will resent death. You'll resent anything associated with sacrifice. And your hearts will be afflicted with wahan, which is a love of comfort. You'll always try to choose the easy path or the path of least struggle. And that is what will result in your many numbers and resources being ineffective against lesser resources. In America, $1.5 billion is raised every year for zakat. AIPAC spend $300 million on lobbying Congress. So they spend less than 30% on Congress, but they still have an outsized impact over the way that we spend our charity in getting it into Gaza. A lot of the charity is stuck in the border, even though the value of that charity is more than what Israel is spending on AIPAC. But because they spent smarter, their lesser investment got our greater charity investment stuck at the border. The point being is that it's not an absence of resources. The resources are there. The problem is how those resources are being deployed, and a lot of that has to do with how the current leaders are using them.
From what you're saying, it sounds to me as if the whole concept of decolonization or the history of decolonization was a complete scam. It sounds like there was no decolonization. If anything, it was just the separation of the colonizer from the colonized by various degrees, but there's still kind of the authoritarian rulers are middlemen for the colonizer, and liberation was never achieved.
I don't think it's that simple. And I'll give you an example, although I'll probably get in trouble for this one. The Algerians were never militarily superior to the French at any period during the 132 years that the French had colonized Algeria. Nevertheless, in 1962, the French had to leave Algeria because the Algerians decided to embark, take to the streets, take to the mountains and go and fight, and they were able to resist and turf out the French. Alistair Thorne has a book called The Savage War of Peace, Algeria 1954 to 1962. And the reason I have this book, because when people read it, they'll be like, how dare he buy such a book and give the guy royalties, is because one day I was sitting with a group of Algerians, and the news at the time, this was a few years back, it was Macron refusing to apologize for colonization. So we sat down and we said, Wallah, Macron hada, Wallah, ma yahshim. Like, he's got no shame, he's not apologized for colonization, these people, whatever. And they were like, that's the thing with the French, they show no remorse and the like. So I was sitting there and I was like, you know what? I want to go and find a book written by a pro-colonizer. They were like, what? I said, I just want to see how they view the world. What is it that was so great about colonization that we're missing, that maybe I just want to see how they understand in terms of like how it goes. So anyway, I found this book, and this book is all about this guy trying to argue that if the French had done this here and this here and this here and this here and been a bit more gentle here, then they could have stayed in Algeria. The fascinating thing about him is he identifies 2 points that led to liberation. The first point is, he says the establishment of the Council of Muslim Scholars by Sheikh Abdul Hamid bin Badis, who was an Amazighi scholar, who famously said that شعب الجزائر مسلم وإلى العروبة ينتسب. The people of Algeria are Muslims and they belong to the Arab nation. Or Uruba being here, anybody who speaks the Arabic language. Which is why now Algeria, there's the French are pushing Amazighi separatist tendencies and trying to split that identity. And the one thing that the separatists hate the most is that one of our greatest scholars in history as Algerians is the Amazighi Sheikh Abdul Hamid bin Badis, who ended the matter and said, we belong to the Muslim nation. We're not separate, the Berbers and the Arabs. Any case. He says the Council of Islamic Scholars revived or reinforced the identity that the French had tried to break. They tried to break the Muslim identity. The Council of Islamic Scholars not revived it because it was still there. They reinforced it, and the graduates of these schools would form the foot soldiers 30 years later when the Front Libération Nationale, Jabhat al-Tahrir, when the Liberation Front would be formed. That would have. He said the second point is that in 1945 there was a massacre of 50,000 Algerians in Stif, Kharata and Gelma. They massacred 50,000. The shock of that massacre jolted Algerian society into resisting once more when they had become a bit tired of resisting. That's not my point. My point here is that it was clear that those who kicked out the French had no dealings with the French whatsoever. And the leadership of this movement came to rule Algeria after 1962. The reason why I don't think it's an extension of colonization is because what happened in Algeria and what happened in Tunisia, or let me do Tunisia better, is that after independence, Bourguiba and Saleh bin Yusuf and these others who fought, who were together in the trenches, Bourguiba decides to exile Saleh bin Yusuf and then have him assassinated. L'Azhar Shraiti, the ferocious warrior of Gafsa during the independence movement, L'Azhar Shraiti, who became a folk hero because of his fight against the French in Tunisia and Gafsa, Bourguiba, who had led the independence movement, had him killed. And no one knows where L'Azhar Shraiti is buried. Bourguiba, who fought the French, and when you read the letters, he believed it. He wanted to kick the French out. When he turned around and looked at Saleh bin Yusuf, the popular Urubi, Arabist, L'Azhar Shraiti, the Muslim folk hero, and these others, Bourguiba looked and went, okay, I hate the French, but I don't want to share power with these guys. These guys think they're my equal. I want to be boss of the new town. When Boumediene comes into power, people around him who are part of the liberation movement are unhappy that Boumediene has become powerful. And so they try to turn on Boumediene. Ben Bella, when he takes power in Algeria, tries to pass through some measures that the others are unhappy. And they're saying, well, Ben Bella, you were in Egypt. You weren't on the ground during the fight. We were the ones here. Why have you come in and been president? And why are you treating us like your subordinates? We're your equals. It's the story of human beings. It's not the colonizer who encouraged these divisions. They fell out between themselves. You know, Karim Belqasim was found in Frankfurt after the falling out of the... Karim Belqasim had the most ferocious units, controversial unit, but one of the most ferocious units during the independence movement. Karim Belqasim was found in a hotel room in Frankfurt, hung from the ceiling by his tie, killed by people around him. Colonizers had nothing to do with it, and that's why, you know, there was when Umar al-Bashir of Sudan imprisoned Hassan al-Turabi, Allah yarahmu. Somebody went to reconcile between them, and so the person who went said to Umar al-Bashir, Umar al-Bashir said, "Do you see what I've done with the rat? I've put him in prison." So the mediator said, "This is Shaitan who got between you." And Umar al-Bashir said, "Wallahi, anta zalamta shaitan fi hadi. You've done an injustice to Shaitan. Shaitan has nothing to do with this." The colonizer had nothing to do with the internal fitna that took place between the leaders after independence. The French did not ask Bourguiba to go and kill Saleh bin Yusuf or to go and kill L'Azhar Shraiti. The French did not ask Bourguiba to not even give L'Azhar Shraiti a proper burial, and no one knows where the guy is buried like to this day. No one asked him. Bourguiba did it of his own will and then called the colonizer back to say to him, listen, I'm going to revamp the whole education system and make it French so I can pull them out of the Arab sphere. No one asked, the colonizer did not ask them to do that. America did not ask the UAE to normalize. UAE offered it. America did not ask the Qataris to normalize. Qataris offered it. The Israelis did not ask the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to imprison Salman al-Uda. The Israelis did not ask Mohammed bin Salman to go and kill Turki al-Jasser. The Americans did not ask the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to lower the volume of adhan to 33% maximum on the speakers. The Americans did not ask Mohammed bin Salman to go and limit the dua for Palestine and the Haram. They didn't ask this. These are things that were offered by people who looked at their cousins and said, hell no, you're not my equal. I'll bring the colonizer against you rather than find some sort of accord with you. The only saving grace to it, I think, is that despite the fitna that occurred, the colonizers could never come back into the country physically. Think about it. The French flag used to wave over Tunisian schools. They don't today because the French were kicked out. So despite the fitna, the colonizers could not come back. And that is progress. The Arab Spring was progress. It showed that authoritarian regimes couldn't last. Ben Ali was toppled. So I wouldn't say that it's an extension of colonization. I think that some of, the people in the Ummah, and I think that this is something that's happened throughout Islamic history, where you'll find that I don't want you to rule over me, so I'll go ally with the Romans against you. I don't want you to rule over me, I'm going to go ally with Persians against you. I don't want you to rule over me, I'm going to bring the Chinese and I'm going to go and bring them to fight you because you, my cousin, I don't want you to rule over me. I'd rather bring the Barani, the outsider, against you instead. And I think that's the sunnah of human beings. But despite that, I don't think the colonizers have been able to capitalize on their capacity because we still had King Faisal 1973 or who did the oil embargo. We still have people using unilateral actions. Jamal Abdel Nasser unilaterally took the Suez Canal. I'm not saying that many of these leaders were good, although I'm a fan of King Faisal, but I'm not saying a lot of these leaders were good like Jamal Abdel Nasser and the like. But I think that the statement that colonizers never left is false. I think the colonizers left and some in the Ummah invited some of them back in a limited capacity in order to settle scores or to spite their brothers and sisters. And that's the reason why we're still in the situation that we are in today.
You remind me of that film by Mel Gibson, Apocalypto. I think there's a quote at the end which mentions something to that effect. When the Spanish boats begin landing on the shores of America.
It's just when you bring that point, we have in history Ibn Alqamah. Everyone says the Mongols turn up to Baghdad and they ransacked Baghdad. No one mentions that it took the Mongols quite some time to enter Baghdad, and they were unable to enter it on their own. The reason they were able to enter it is a man called Ibn Alqamah, one of the advisors of the Khalifa, goes to the gates and opens it for the Mongols. He says, or the report suggests he thought if we open it, then the Mongols might spare us. But the point is, until he opens the gate, the Mongols can't enter Baghdad. They're struggling to do so. My point is that sometimes the colonizer doesn't have the power to enter the region or to find collaborator, to colonize the region. They're only able to do so because of a collaborator in the region. The colonizer is unable to enter Baghdad without Ibn Alqamah opening the door. Without Ibn Alqamah, some argue there's no ransacking of Baghdad. And this is the point that I'm making. It's that sometimes it's not that the colonizer is so smart or clever. It's that some random brother in the Ummah goes to Paris or goes to Washington and says, I hate Faris so much. I want you to give me an army to crush him. And then they say, oh my God, this is a wonderful opportunity. And I promise I finish on this example. Kuwait. We were talking about Kuwait before we started this. So my father was a journalist in 1990 at the time with Sharq al-Awsat, which was one of the main papers at the time. There is an article that he wrote that I came across before when Saddam invades Kuwait. My father wrote in the article, and it's what got him in trouble with some of the Islamist movements. He wrote that Saddam's invasion of Kuwait is a disaster because the Kuwaitis are now going to rush to the Americans, and where America has been struggling to get a military base in the region, the Kuwaitis are now going to give it wholeheartedly. Not only that, Saddam has broken the trust with the Gulf regions, so now they're also probably going to invite military bases, American military bases, because they don't have the power to resist them on their own. They're going to, and when the Americans come, they will not leave. And that's the point. The Kuwaitis who, albeit Saddam did ask them to abide by a quota, that oil quota that they refused to abide by. But the point is, when Kuwaitis were invaded by Saddam, they rushed and brought the Americans in, and Saddam gave them the opportunity to do so. My point is, the colonizer doesn't come in because they are almighty and powerful. It's because someone in the Ummah opens the door for them, thinking they can control the tiger, and when the tiger comes in, they realize the tiger starts eating everybody. And now as Israel bombs Iran, all of the Gulf states think that Iran being defeated is a boon for them. Perhaps they don't realize that Iran won't be the end. Palestine was first, and I did nothing. Now they're going to go after Iran. Then they'll go after Pakistan. Then they'll go after Turkey. Then they'll go after you, and there'll be no one else. They'll pick them off one by one.
Yeah, in terms of the whole conversation around treachery within peoples that have been colonized and so forth, I think one thing that's exemplary, or one area where this has been done to a T, is Palestine, where you had the Fatah movement were essentially the forebearers, those who carried the torch for Palestinian resistance, and they were exiled, and then they had their issues, whether it's in Jordan and then Lebanon, then they moved to Tunisia. And when the first Intifada popped off in 1987, it seemed as though Arafat saw a threat coming from within Palestinian society in Palestine. Part of that threat was Hamas. And then he decided that he'd go full throttle with making a deal with the Israelis, creating the Oslo Accords, Palestinian Authority, which currently now acts as the Israelis' guard dog or subcontractor in the West Bank. So this is not just North Africa, it's also everywhere, it seems.
I think one thing that is worth noting about that particular point is that I think sometimes we underestimate how Saddam's invasion of Kuwait paralyzed all of the Palestinian movements. The decision of the PLO to come out in support of Saddam's invasion of Kuwait made it so that the Gulf states all withdrew their support for the PLO and withdrew their support for Yasser Arafat. There is that famous incident where Hosni Mubarak of Egypt tells Yasser Arafat, when he hesitates over Oslo, he tells him, sign ya ibn al-kalb, sign, you son of a dog. Suggesting that the decision to support Saddam's invasion of Kuwait meant that by the time Yasser Arafat is sitting in front of the Americans, he's got no Arab support. He's got no one leveraging, and he's actually got... And I think that sometimes we underestimate that a lot of the decisions made in the Palestinian cause that you mentioned as well is as a result of short-term national interest taking priority over the Ummah's interest, which is to see the Palestinians put on equal footing as well. And it happened again in the Second Intifada as well, when, deals were made on the side in order to dampen the Second Intifada as well, in and of itself. But I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشُلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. O you who believe, لَا تَنَازَعُوا, don't enter into these fierce wrestling matches with each other. فَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ, the beautiful smell that brings you all together will vanish and it will disappear. And I think we're seeing that today with regards to the Palestinian cause, in that a genocide is taking place. A full-on genocide, live-streamed. And the Egyptian army, instead of doing something, blocks the ones who are trying to break the siege. And I think that shows the extent to which, and I started with this idea of the Ummah transcends nation borders. On this point, I don't know if you've read the book by Gertrude Bell. Gertrude Bell was the teacher of Lawrence of Arabia. So Gertrude Bell was a traveler in the Middle East at the time, and she'd later advise, MI6 and MI5, and she trained, Lawrence of Arabia, who would later convince the Arabs that the Ottomans were no longer a Muslim empire. They'd become a Turk empire, nationalist, Sen Ben Yok, Turkiye var. They won't like that I've used the AK Party thing to represent the young Turks. But in any case, that, it's not about me and you. It's all about being Turk. And therefore, it's no longer the Ottoman Empire. Lawrence of Arabia plays on these underlying grievances. In any case, which is a warning perhaps for Turkey today in terms of how far it shifts towards that nationalist identity. In any case, Gertrude Bell writes that one of the unique aspects of the Muslim world, she writes, of the Ummah, is that a Muslim does not identify based on a nation the way we identify based on France, UK, America, or America at the time, but Germany and the like. She said the strange thing about Muslim is, if you ask his name, he'll tell you, I am Faris al-Khalili from Khalil of Palestine. I am Sami al-Bouzidi from Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. I am Muhammad al-Tunisi. I am Abdullah al-Dimashqi. I am Abdurrahman al-Baghdadi. The surname is always based on the city. In other words, their surname is a geographical location because for them it's an irrelevant detail because they belong to a broader ummatic consciousness. And she writes that the first step to demolishing an Islamic empire is to redefine the identity from an ummatic one. She doesn't use the word ummatic, but from one that is a religious bond to one that is a geographical national bond. And she uses Iraq as the example. She says, we need to create an Iraqi identity. We need to bring the scope of the identity from one in which a man in Damascus identifies with Jakarta in Indonesia to one in which the Damascene only identifies with the Syrian and sees a disconnect with Indonesia. We need to create these new identities. And that's what she preaches in Lawrence of Arabia, who goes to the Arabs afterwards, or the modern day Gulf Arabs, and says to them that the Ottomans are no longer Islamic. They're becoming Turk, you may as well become Arab. And they form that sort of Arab identity where they have the borders, but the secondary identity of an Ummah identity is what allows them to continue to feel sympathy for some of those movements. The psychology matters here. The psychology matters. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحبه لنفسه. None of you truly believe until they love for their brother what they love for themselves. What is the definition of brother that the Prophet ﷺ is using in this context? Is it the Arabi for the Arabi, the Habashi for the Habashi, the Turki for the Turki, the Kurdi for the Kurdi, the Sini for the Sini, the Indonesian to the Indonesian? Is that his definition of the brother here? Because here he's talking about the relationship between citizens of the state. That's what he's talking about. He's saying the relationship between the people of this new ummah that has been created. None of you believe until they love for their brother what they love for themselves. He doesn't qualify the hadith by saying, none of you love for your brother what you love for yourself. And that means that on Eid, if someone buys you Spider-Man, you buy him Spider-Man. No. He says that it's in everything. If you don't like to be subject to an attack by an Israeli, then love for your brother by doing for them what you would want done for you. Go and rescue them. That's what he means. Do not allow inherent borders to prevent you from doing so. وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. We created you in nations and tribes for no other reason than you might know one another, so that you can get to know each other. But the best of you is the one who is closer to Allah in piety, not the one who lives in this geographic location, not the one who is Ben Turk or Ana Arabi or Ana Kada. The Prophet says this means absolutely nothing in terms of your status. It is absolutely irrelevant. It means nothing because the one that you consider low is better than you if their taqwa is virtually higher. What Gertrude Bell said was, we need to redefine this hadith through the national lens. We need to make it a Iraqi does not believe until he loves for the Iraqi what he loves for himself. A Tunisi does not believe until he loves for the Tunisi what he loves for. We need to redefine hadith through a different lens from that which the Prophet ﷺ, and that's what they managed to achieve so well, whereby today, when Trump comes, the demand is not for Gaza. It's, I have these borders of Saudi. I'm giving you $1 trillion to guarantee me the interest of Saudi. For لا يؤمن سعوديا حتى يحب لسعودي ما يحبه لنفسه. No Saudi believes until they love for the Saudi. You said astaghfirullah because it's gone against the very fitrah that's in your heart. The Emirati said, no, I don't love for the Saudi what I love for the Emirati. I don't trust Saudi. I don't love for the Saudi what I want for the Emirati. I don't want their security to be guaranteed because maybe I need to leverage against their security. لا يؤمن إماراتي حتى يحب الإماراتيين ما يحبه لنفسه. We Emiratis are different from the Saudis. Our interpretation of the hadith is very, and the Qatari said لا يؤمن قطري حتى يحب لقطري لا يؤمن قطري حتى يحب لقطري ما يحب لنفسه. They said we have our own interests, whether it's in Libya, whether it's in these places, etc. Therefore, we need to pay. What Gertrude Bell did was she said, They have defined Islam as something that governs a geographic expanse that is impossible to conquer. So let us redefine Islam within limited geographical expanses, whereby the geographical borders will be the means of interpretation of the hadith, and they succeeded emphatically. Think about it. How does the Turk justify Erdogan's inaction on Palestine? He says, where are you Arabs? What's it got to do with us? Sen ben yok Türkiye var. Me and you know Turkey is everything. We have Turkish interest, pragmatic realpolitik. As my very good friend Raghib Soylo tweeted, the journalist for Middle East Eye, he tweeted and said, we follow realpolitik and pragmatic policy. Turkish interest come first. Sen ben yok Türkiye var. What does the Saudi say? Why doesn't Egypt do something? Why have we got to do with it? What does he doesn't say, why don't we do something? Why doesn't Egypt? Khalil Masriin, what do they say? احنا حاربنا يا عم الحق. We already fought 2 wars. We're done. I'm sorry, we're not doing anything. Find somebody else to go and fight. As the leak of the Jamal Abdel Nasser, his son released the audio clip where Jamal Abdel Nasser says, I'm done fighting the Israelis. You lot want to go? You lot go. In a conversation with Muammar al-Gaddafi. Gertrude Bell, or the Egyptian, Saudi and Turk agree that there is a Muslim obligation to Palestine, but their interpretation of that obligation has been reframed through the lens that Gertrude Bell argued in her book. It's been reframed through the lens of the borders that have been established in the state. And the darkest irony is that the borders of these states were not established through the ethnic efforts of the ethnicity. Turkey's borders today were not established by Turks. Ataturk could not convince the Anatolians to fight with him. He had to get the Sanusis from Libya, to Ahmed al-Sanusi, to convince the Anatolians, because the Anatolians said, I don't believe in Sen ben yok Türkiye var. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in a Turkish nation. I believe in Ummat Muhammad. I believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I believe in the Caliphate. If you tell me to fight for the Turkish flag, I'm not. These are Turks from Anatolia. The Turk said, I'm not fighting for a Turkish flag. I believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So when Ataturk said, Ben Turk, I'm a Turk, come and fight with me as a Turk, they said, get out of here, man. We think you're a secular guy. We think you don't love Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're not fighting with you. So Ataturk has to call Ahmed al-Sanusi an Arab from Sanusi order in Libya, to go to the Turks in Anatolia and say that Ataturk is a Ghazi, Mustafa Kemal is a fighter fi sabilillah, and they tell him, are you sure, Sheikh? The Turk says to, are you sure, Sheikh? Because he's Turk, we're Turk, we know this Turk. He says, no, he's a Ghazi, and that's why they go and fight. Turkey's borders are not established because of a Turkish effort. They're established because Ataturk called on the Ummah and the Ummah answered. And they have the nerve, the Kemalists, to turn around and say to the Ummah, Sen ben yok Türkiye var. That this is, I know it's an AK party. AK party will say, no, we are the Islamists who did it. It's a Kemalist slogan, Sen ben yok Türkiye var. The reason why I'm saying all of this is that even when we're talking about Palestine today, and I'm mentioning what Saudi said, what UAE said, what Qatar said, and you're asking me, where is the Ummah in that regard? Perhaps I myself have fallen victim to Gertrude Bell reframing, in which now we're breaking up the Ummah into pieces and talking about their own individual interests in order to explain why the Ummah doesn't move. And perhaps we're trying to find a framework in which, within this framework of Gertrude Bell, where can the solution go? And perhaps the solution cannot come from an Ummah that is divided based on these borders. Maybe we need to start talking in a language in which it transcends those borders. And I think that one of the reasons there was such a backlash to the Arab Spring is because the Arab Spring was breaking down those borders, and there was a genuine concern that what starts in Tunisia can affect that in Saudi Arabia. How can we insulate our borders? This is the phrase. Insulate our borders from what happens elsewhere in the Ummah. And I finish on this point. I know I've gone on about this, and I appreciate your generosity in allowing me to go on about this. But I finish on this point. There is, I think his name is Hakel or Hakel or Bernard something. He is a friend of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who teaches in Berkeley in the US, in California. He wrote an article, I think it's for the Atlantic or for the New Yorker. I can't remember which platform, but if you just search Bernard Berkeley bin Salman, it comes up as the first result on Google. He argued that the reason bin Salman is so exciting as a crown prince is because bin Salman is redefining the Saudi identity. This is what he's arguing in the article. He says, Bin Salman is redefining the Saudi identity from one that is influenced by Muslim issues to one that can only be influenced by Saudi issues. That's his phrasing. Bin Salman is redefining the Saudi identity from one that is affected by Palestine, by Morocco, by Indonesia, by Malaysia, by the plight of Muslims of the Rohingya, by the plight. He's redefining it to, quote, insulate the Saudi identity from these issues. That's what they're celebrating. Meaning, what do I mean when I talk about, why did I present the Gertrude Bell issue? Is to say that when you talk about the Ummah is paralyzed because it is interpreting Ummatic power through nation interest lens. It's interpreting Ummatic power through the borders that were crafted by Sykes-Picot and beyond. We are interpreting Islam through Sykes-Picot and then wondering why it produces a skewed result when we try to talk about how we can implement that hadith.
I want to touch on the Arab Spring in a bit, but firstly, or before that, at risk of sounding like I'm a spokesperson for the Qataris, you've mentioned the Qataris a few times, and now in the same vein as the Emiratis and the Saudis. And
in a particular aspect.
Yeah, now the Qataris, they have many issues. They're not perfect. They have issues in terms of how, there's essentially a caste system in that society with regards to laborers, etc. But I think a strong argument can be made for the fact that their foreign policy has been, at least in a large part, pro-Ummah, in a sense, or at least pro-Palestine and pro-liberation, pro-democracy, anti-dictatorship, etc. So are the Qataris allowed some slack when it comes to that regard?
I'm going to try to phrase this carefully. I was in Doha in November, and with these regimes, you say something wrong, you can't go there ever again. In 1996, no Muslim country up until that point has normalized with the Israelis. Egypt has a peace treaty, Jordan has a peace treaty, but Israelis are not exactly flying into Egypt and they're not exactly flying into Jordan. It's a peace treaty that's clearly done, imposed, however you want to describe it. My point is, it's unwilling normalization, not willing normalization with the Israelis. In 96, the Emir of Qatar at the time is ill and goes to Switzerland for treatment. He gets a phone call on his hospital bed from his son. His son is called Hamad bin Khalifa, who tells him, "Father, don't come home. I've taken over. I'm now the ruler of this country. Bye, Felicia." The father is so angry from his hospital bed in Switzerland, he calls King Fahd in Saudi Arabia and he calls the ruler of Emirat at the time and says to them, "Guys, my son has told me not to come home and taken over. Like, what the hell? Like, can you help me out?" So they say, "We can't allow sons to topple their fathers in that regard. So we're going to prepare an army to restore the father." By the way, you can take this part out later if you want. But in any case, and I'm not suggesting anything whatsoever. So I'm aware. I always tell people my intention is not to get anyone in trouble, like, at all. And I'm aware when we talk about our region, there are consequences when you say things. I'm supposed to go to South Africa, and one of the reasons that my friend was like, Turkish Airlines is much cheaper. I told him, but Turkish Airlines flies over Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and if there's an emergency landing in any of those, like, I don't want to go anywhere near their airspace. So I'll go the other way or go a longer way as long as I don't have to go over their airspace. I'm aware there's consequences talking about this, which is why when students say, "I want to do politics," I'm like, think twice about it. It's not a nice feeling not being able to go to these places. Anyway, so the Saudis in UAE, they prepare a plan to restore the father to his power in order to tell the son, what you're doing is not good. So according to Al Jazeera, this is not like, according to Al Jazeera channel, the son who's toppled his father calls the Americans at 3 a.m. in the morning and tells them that if you prevent my father from coming home and if you stop the Saudis and UAE from restoring him to power, I will give you the largest US military base in the region from which you can operate, and I will willingly establish ties with the Israelis, because I believe in a vision in which the Israelis can be part of the region, which is what led to the opening of the economic office. The Americans and the French are so giddy with excitement. This is what I meant by no one asked them. No one asked them to normalize. They're so giddy with excitement that they call the Saudis and say, if you take one step towards Qatar, we'll bomb the living daylights out of you. And they establish Al-Udaid, which to this day points towards Saudi Arabia. After the second intifada, the Qataris realized this looks really bad, that there's a second intifada and we've got an Israeli economic office. They shut down the Israeli economic office. The Israelis get upset and say, whoa, what does this mean? Are you reversing normalization? They say, no, we're not. We're still committed to it. It's a bit hard right now because our people are a bit angry and a bit whatever. So in 2006, they invite Shimon Peres to Doha. They tell him an Israeli president has never visited any country in the region. The UAE had Isaac Herzog last year. But before that, no Israeli president had ever visited the region. Doha were the first to say to the Israelis, we will break ground in normalization by inviting Shimon Peres to Doha. And Sheikh Yusuf Qardawi, Allah yarahmu, miskeen, was so tied up that when they went to him and said, yes, Sheikh Yusuf, you're in Doha, say something, what can you do? He was so terrified for his own safety that he ended up saying, I'm against it, but at least in Qatar I can say I'm against it. Because the Emir, may Allah bless him, allows me to. It was sort of a, you mentioned supporting democracy. I agree that the Qataris are better than the UAE and Saudi if you were to put them against each other. At least with regards to Palestine, in that the Qataris are not seeking to ban any expression of sentiment in support of the Palestinians. I agree. I agree that they are very effusive in their dua for Palestine in deploying Al Jazeera, which has frustrated the Israelis, and I agree with that entirely. I agree that Al Jazeera for a long time became an outlet in which people were able to speak against the regimes and be able to speak more bluntly. I agree with that entirely. And I actually think that's a reflection in which Qatar's vision for the region is one in which authoritarianism is not deployed to against the people's will, but that the people can be coaxed to accept these rulers and the like. The reason why, when you say cut them some slack, I agree. This is why when I said earlier you've put them in the same bracket, I said I only put them in the same bracket in some aspects. But let me give an example of somebody in my position who believes it is the duty of the Muslim to enjoin what is good and forbid what is evil. In the World Cup, Qatar came under heavy pressure over LGBT. And many Muslims stood with Qatar on that regard. So the Qataris came up with an idea to get good press. They said, we're going to be the first after Kuwait to establish a democratic parliament. The problem that the Qataris had was the people didn't necessarily, Qataris were not screaming for an elected parliament. This was supposed to be for show. But given the scrutiny, they needed the parliament to have genuine powers, but to balance without upsetting the rulership in how do you make a powerful parliament that can be controlled. So what they did was they created a parliament with sweeping powers, but they changed the election law to decide who can and who could not vote. So overnight, 1/3 of the population was stripped of the right to vote. Amongst them were groups that were associated with a tribe called Al-Murrah. So there's this lawyer, Qatari lawyer, ordinary Qatari lawyer called Hazza' bin Ali. Hazza' bin Ali does a YouTube video where he says, yes, Samul Amir, oh Royal Highness, why have you stripped me from my right to vote? I'm a Qatari. I'm not a second-class citizen. And yes, Samul Amir, I know you're a wise Emir. I love you, genuinely. I supported you in the blockade. I love being Qatari. I'm a Qatari Aban and Jad, father and grandfather as well. You've always been a wise Emir. We've never had need to protest against you in any way whatsoever. Qatar, you've built it wonderfully. You've cared for its citizens. Yes, Sumul Emir, whoever's advised you about this, this is a wrong move. I feel hurt by it. And he does this 20-minute video. In the evening, he's with his family members in the street and he's saying, yeah, Royal Highness, we're upset about this and we want to register our complaint, and, we are protesting silmiyan, peacefully. The next day, 300 armed guards turn up to his house, they knock his door down, they grab him and they throw him in prison. At that time, we're all watching and thinking, okay, the guy, maybe there's no culture for it really in Qatar. After the World Cup, the guy will be released. We understand it's all, like a masrahiyan, and we understand why the Qataris are doing it. There's no point saying anything. I was actually quiet during that period. I didn't say anything about it whatsoever. After the World Cup, the court ruled that Hazza bin Ali is sentenced to life in prison for upsetting the social order. There is a poet who became famous in the Arab Spring, Qatar's main poet, Muhammad ibn Dhib. For those who follow the Arab Spring, he had beautiful poetry about the Arab Spring. He came out and he said, I don't understand it. We're supporting democracies all over and we don't even allow a guy to protest like his right to vote. Why is it when he goes to the Emir and say, in a very nice way, why is he? My question here is this, or my dilemma here is, when you see a regime doing something bad, do we call it out or do we keep quiet because they're better than the other two? When you see something that's done that's like, Hazza bin Ali, the Prophet ﷺ said that the blood of a Muslim is more valuable than the bricks on a Kaaba. And I finished just on this point to highlight the dilemma exactly as it was. So I used to do quite a bit of work with the Qataris on their communications and the like. So there was an incident that took place. I won't tell that story because I don't want to sound like I'm bashing the Qataris. But in any case, it was really, basically, they knew the blockade was coming from bin Salman and bin Zayed. They knew. So there was a Saudi opposition who fled Saudi Arabia and went to Doha. When he went to Doha, the Qataris were honest. They told him, we can't keep you here. Because if you stay here, like the Saudis will use you as an excuse to really pressure us. And we believe that there's a blockade coming. And we believe the UAE are the masterminds. We want the Saudis not to be too close to UAE. We want to appease the Saudis, which is understandable politically. There's nothing wrong with that. So they told the guy, you need to go somewhere else. So the guy said, okay, I'll apply for refugee status in Norway. The embassy, the Norwegian embassy, very quickly, within 2 days, they gave him refugee status. The guy got on a plane, and the plane got on the tarmac to take off. And the Qataris had a change of heart. They stopped the plane, they pulled the guy off, and they gave him to Saudi Arabia. And the guy vanished. And this was to try to appease Mohammed bin Salman to make sure that the blockade would not come. I was sitting at home at the time, and I'm not saying I'm important by any stretch of imagination. I'm just talking about the dilemma personally. I'm not saying I have any impact in anything that happens in the world. I don't believe myself to be influential in any capacity whatsoever. So just so people don't understand, I'm not saying that I am important enough that the Qatari government. I'm saying the dilemma as somebody who, as a Muslim, my dilemma as a Muslim, that's the way. My dilemma as a Muslim. I sat there on the sofa and I was composing a tweet about it and trying to do it in a way where the Qataris would not cancel the first class flights that I was enjoying as part of working on their communications program and things like that. I was hired as a consultant, I didn't work for them. I was hired as a consultant to advise on certain things, on perceptions and pushing back against the anti-Arab Spring movement, which was the specific role. So no one thinks anything shady. There was the anti-Arab Spring movement. It was and the anti-Arab Spring movement was trying to convince the Europeans that the people pushing for democracy were terrorists, that Muslim Brotherhood were terrorists, that those who sought to elections in the region, they're terrorists, and that the autocratic regimes were better. I was pushing the argument that if you don't allow people freedom, it will be chaos. You need to allow people freedom. And the proof is the Arab Spring itself. Anyway, I'm sitting there crafting a tweet. And I must have sat there for about 3 hours, and my wife Sumaya, she walked into the room. And Algerians, my wife is half Algerian, half English. Algerians are very straightforward and hard-headed and stubborn. So my wife comes in and she goes very angrily. She says, you've been sitting here now for 3 hours. You promised to take the kids to the park. You're basically sitting here, you're basically dead weight. Like, what on earth is so important that you neglect your kids? So I said to her, Sumaya, the Qataris did a madness. Those were my exact words. I said, Qataris did a madness. And like really nasty, like my heart is, when I think about the guy, Miskeen, I feel I have a duty to say something about him. Like, we can't just, And she said, so what's the problem? I said, but I know once I put this tweet out, The Qataris are better than UAE and Saudi, but Qatar is also it's like you say something negative and you can have all the dosh in your face, even if you do it from a sincere place. I said, if I put this tweet out, I think they're going to tear up all the contracts. My wife doesn't really give a damn about the nuances of the politics. My wife just said, if Bin Salman did it, would you have tweeted? I said, yes. There's your answer. Tweet the damn thing and take the kids to the park. Yalla. And sure enough, later on, they just went, like ripped off. As a Muslim, my brother got wronged. My brother has vanished. Not my blood brother, but my Muslim brother. Probably tortured in the prisons. He was sold as a scapegoat. As a Muslim, do I sit here and say to you that our duty is to keep quiet because one is better than the other two? Is my duty to say that, yeah, the guy is probably being electrocuted, beaten, tortured, has his face smashed in? Sheikh Suleiman al-Dawish is believed to be dead now. I'm not talking about Sheikh Suleiman al-Dawish here, but Sheikh Suleiman al-Dawish is believed to be dead in Saudi prisons. Turki al-Jasir, who got executed 4 days ago, Turki al-Jasir's crime was he used a pseudonym on Twitter to criticize policies that were leading to the imprisonment of scholars. He said, this is wrong what we're doing. The Saudi Crown Prince paid 2 spies at Twitter to reveal the real account holder. They gave him the real name and the address. Bin Salman arrested him and then executed him. Explain to me, is my Umrah so valuable that I should keep quiet about Turki al-Jasir? Do I say to myself as a Muslim that because of the grand scheme of politics, because there's a benefit here politically, that Turki al-Jasir, I should keep quiet and not mention his name? I'm not saying I'm not saying that my way is the correct way. That's not what I'm saying. And the reason why I'm not saying that is I would be a hypocrite. I always tell students who come and say, I want to do politics, I tell them, don't do it. Don't do it. Go be a truck driver for £85,000 a year. That's better for you. Don't get involved in it because it's a heartbreaking thing. Why? Because you wrestle inside your heart. Was it the right thing to talk about these people? Should I just have let them get tortured? I'm not saying I'm powerful, but as in, should we have just ignored them and let them get tortured because Al Jazeera does good coverage on Palestine? I don't know the answer. I'm not saying I have the answer, but I'm trying to explain my dilemma here. When you say kalimatu haqqin 'inda sultanin ja'ir, say the good word to a sultan that has transgressed. Not a sultan in kafir. Sultan in ja'ir. Ja'ir means when someone has transgressed the boundaries. Atajru, are you transgressing? What it means is a ruler can be good but sometimes transgress. The Prophet ﷺ said that the good word on a sultan that has transgressed, not an evil sultan. People often think the translation is tyrant. The translation is not tyrant. The translation is a sultan that has transgressed, meaning they can do some good here, but they've done something bad. Is the kalimatu haqqin 'inda sultanin ja'ir here? Should you be doing it? If you like the regime, should we be easier on the regime? Because take, for example, like Erdogan and Imamoglu. And everybody accuses me of having a soft spot for Erdogan, which I do. I put it out on the table. I think somebody who has restored the hijab back to its role in the 2008 constitutional amendments, restored the Kurdish language. I'm not saying he restored it, but lifted the ban on the Kurdish language and manifestation of Kurdish culture. I think, and I think he deserves to be celebrated in that regard. When he goes after Imamoglu, the mayor of Istanbul. Now, I know that Imamoglu nostalgizes an era where Muslims were oppressed. I know it. I know the people who back him are people who have nostalgia for an era that was dark, repressive, violent, and brutal. I know it. But they're not my teachers. So when you want to take out Imamoglu because you're worried he'll run in a presidential election, and you say, I'm going to remove his diploma from university because that's one of the requirements to run, and then you raid him and you arrest. As a Muslim, I understand that Imamoglu is a repulsive figure. But it feels wrong that you don't do it through due process. Omar al-Mukhtar, the Libyan revolutionary leader, captured Italian soldiers, and his men said to him, let's do to them what they do to us. Let's torture them. Let's carve their skin off. And the Omar al-Khattab said, why on earth would you do that? And they told him, yeah, Sheikh, they do it to us. And he said, but they're not our teachers. They're not the criteria by which I judge. My point is, the Qatari criteria of being better than Saudi UAE is not the criteria in which I'm judging a nation. I'm judging a nation on the broader things. And that's why, now probably, I don't know if Qatar Airways is to it, but my point is that if you're asking about Palestine, they're better than Saudi UAE. If you're asking me on Israel, I don't know if they are better than Saudi UAE. I think all three of them are jostling for very good ties with the Israelis and presenting a vision for normalization in the region. I believe all three of them in that regard. Palestine, they're not the same. Israel, I think they are almost the same. I think in terms of the Arab Spring, they're definitely not the same. And that's why I when you said you've put them in the same bracket, that's why I responded, and I finish on this point, with I put them in the same bracket on the issue of paying jizya, on the issue of giving money to Donald Trump. They're not on the same bracket on a range of other issues. That was hard. That was walking on eggshells.
I think you broke a few eggs there, to be honest. Before we move on to what I think might be our last point, you mentioned Sheikh Qaradawi there, and I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want to break your train of thought, but you mentioned something about Sheikh Qaradawi.
Allah
and rahmatullahi alayh. And the way you mentioned it, you delved kind of into intentions. You said he said a particular thing because he was scared. How would you know that he was scared? How do you know it wasn't...
Not scared. Let me rephrase that. Not that he was scared. I said it was almost as if he was scared.
Okay.
I said almost as if he was scared. I said the statement was, he said, I'm against the visit, but then spent the rest, like the majority of his answer, celebrating that the Emir was allowing him to do so. And that's what I meant by almost. It was almost as if he said, I condemn it, but didn't want to jeopardize his position, because the reality is he would not have been able to go anywhere in the region. Doha, may Allah reward them, they gave him sanctuary when he had to flee from the Egyptians and the like. And that's why it's not delving into intention. It's almost as if the interpretation could be, but I'm willing to accept that might not have been.
But he wouldn't have needed to stay in the region. Potentially he could move anywhere. He could have gone to Europe, to wherever. He can do his work as a sheikh or as a mufti, etc. from wherever.
Possible. And he did phenomenal work for the ummah. May Allah bless him and reward him for it.
Yeah, it's just that I wanted to clarify that point because some people might take the wrong impression.
Yeah.
I think this will be the final point I end on. Muslim armies. We've heard a lot from groups such as one that's recently been prescribed here in the UK, Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, that they should call on Muslim armies to take up arms or whatever in order to help the Palestinians in Gaza. Some have criticized this role, and they said that Muslim armies, they're fulfilling their current role. The so-called Muslim armies, they're doing their role. They're working for the authoritarians who do subcontracting for the ex-colonizers, so to speak. Where do you stand on this call for moving the Muslim armies to work for the Ummah and for Palestine?
As a Muslim is always opposed to war unless it's absolutely necessary. The Prophet Muhammad said, no Muslim should seek war, but if the enemy comes, stand firm. And Salah ad-Din Ayyubi said, beware the business of blood, for blood never forgets. He was telling his people who perhaps were happy at all the victories that don't celebrate the shedding of blood. Shedding of blood isn't something no Muslim looks for. And if ever there was a situation where there was a battle or war, it's not something the Muslim enjoys. It's important to emphasize this. And that's why I think that when it comes to this matter, if I thought that the Muslim armies mobilizing was the only way to liberate Palestine, or let me rephrase that, to end this genocide, then everybody would be making the call and I would agree with it. My issue with what's taking place in Palestine in terms of the genocide is that you don't need any Muslim army to mobilize towards Gaza in order to end the genocide. There's so many economic and diplomatic moves that the Ummah has at its disposal that could stop the genocide tomorrow. My issue with genocide is that the greatest tragedy is not that it's taking place, even though that's a tragedy. The greatest tragedy is that power, diplomatic and economic power, exists in the Ummah that could be deployed tomorrow that could end the genocide. And I'll give you an example. When Trump imposed the tariffs on China, and imposed the tariffs generally, and on the European Union, Macron summoned all of the French companies into an emergency meeting, the ones that were investing in America. And he said to them that I forbid you from investing in America because, quote, what message does it send when you're investing and giving money to an enemy that is attacking us, to someone that is attacking us? My point was, he was saying, what idiot gives money to somebody who is bringing harm to us? Apply that to the Ummah. What fool gives $3.4 trillion to the nation that's enabling the genocide? What message does it send? If you told the Americans that I'm halting my investments in the US, recalling my ambassadors, that I am raising the oil prices. I'm going to play with those gas prices that I've done before. Why? Because I'm going to make you pay a price for this genocide. There's no way I'm allowing it to happen. As King Faisal said, we can live on our dates and our camels. You're the ones who can't live without the oil and the like. We're willing to do so for Palestine and Gaza. If Turkey suspended trade with the Israelis and said there's no way I'm doing it, if UAE reversed normalization of ties, followed by Saudi Arabia normalization via Bahrain, if they ordered Bahrain that they kicked into normalization and told them you need to reverse, and Morocco reversed normalization, and Sudan reversed normalization, although those who are trying to lobby, they reverse normalization of ties. I think that if you embarked on a number of these diplomatic measures, and then they collectively came in and said to the Europeans that we'll also withdraw our ambassadors from Europe as well in protest, the same way that Turkey withdrew its ambassador from Paris when French Parliament passed a law recognizing the Armenian genocide, the same way that UAE withdrew its ambassador from Lebanon when George Qardahi, the media minister, criticized their role in Yemen, the same way that bin Salman kicked out the Canadian ambassador from Saudi Arabia and suspended trade deals with Canada when the Canadian ambassador criticized the human rights record in Saudi Arabia. The same way that bin Salman ramped up oil prices when Biden said he's going to render him a pariah. Bin Salman ramped up oil prices 2 weeks before the midterm elections to make sure that the Democrats took a hit because he said, you want to treat me like a pariah? Let me show you what I can do in order to pressure you. I think if you were to embark on these measures, I think that if the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, when China is starting to move away from the Americans because of the tariffs, when they cancel their Boeing contracts, I think if Anwar Ibrahim hadn't come in and said to Boeing that, oh, if China are cancelling, I'll buy those Boeing contracts to you, for you as well. I'll buy those Boeing planes in order to appease Donald Trump. When Blinken goes and visits Malaysia or goes visits Laos or Cambodia or wherever that ASEAN meeting took place, and Anwar Ibrahim in the same breath says, I condemn what you're doing in Gaza, but can we do business on semiconductors because we can be an alternative to Taiwan and we're ready to work with Americans in this regard, and you shake hands with Blinken and they're smiling, wearing the traditional clothing. I think if Anwar Ibrahim says the way Mahathir once upon a time said, I know he doesn't like the comparison between the two, the way Mahathir used to say, no, I'm not going to allow the Israelis to participate. I'm going to make a stand on this regard. I think if the Muslim leaders collectively said, this is a red line for us, the way that the Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, when he was Crown Prince in 2001, he later became king, when he withdrew the Saudi ambassador from the US over Bush's support for Israel during the Second Intifada, when he cancelled the military exercises, cancelled the military meetings and training, and sent a letter to Bush telling him this is a decisive moment in our relations. We are willing to break our whole US relationship if you don't get the Israelis to stop attacking the Palestinians after the second. And Bush panics and stops the Israelis in the Second Intifada, which is why Yasser Arafat thanked the Saudis after the Second Intifada, because he knew it was the Saudi threat that got Bush to get the Israelis to back off the Palestinians. I think if they deployed those diplomatic and economic measures, and on top of that, stopped reassuring the genocider that there's a future for them in the region, even if they continue the genocide. Think about it. When the UAE refuses to reverse normalization, what they're saying is, genocide is not a red line, I see a future for you here. When Saudi Arabia refuses to close the airspace, if you open Flight Radar now and you look at the flights from Tel Aviv to Dubai, you'll find that they are, up until 2 weeks ago, still flying over Saudi airspace. The only reason they're not flying over Saudi airspace is because of the missiles taking place recently, but they're still flying over Saudi airspace. The Saudi Crown Prince, despite the genocide, has not shut the airspace, refused to withdraw the billions of dollars of investment that he's put into the Israelis through Jared Kushner's investment fund. He's still allowing Israeli YouTubers and journalists to go visit the gates of Medina Munawwara and to record themselves doing so. He's still allowing Israeli delegations to visit Saudi Arabia. He's still allowing the Israelis delegations to come and visit Saudi Arabia and to go and traverse the country and participate in sports tournaments like the Dakar Rally and the EA Sports. When you look at all of these that's taking place during the genocide, what message is it sending that when the Israelis launched their ground offensive on Gaza, bin Salman, when he's being asked by people to cancel the Riyadh season, instead he brings Shakira to dance on the night that the Israelis embarked on their ground offensive in Gaza? What does it mean when the genocide is taking place and Erdogan refuses to cut the trade and only limits trade, not cuts it off, limits trade, when he loses 10 cities in the municipality because he's telling the Israelis that my people are angry, can you stop the genocide? I'm not going to cut the trade, but I have to do something because my people punished me in the election, because my people said to me that even if it means bringing the seculars back in power, we don't want to abandon Palestine. We're going to punish you by making you lose 10 cities in the municipality neutrality elections. My issue is not just the diplomatic and economic power that they have to deploy. It's that there is a consistent reassuring of the Israelis that no matter what they do, these Muslim nations will not compromise trade, they will not compromise money, they will not compromise military ties. Morocco is still doing military exercises openly with the Israelis, and the Americans are saying that if Americans are upset over Gaza, the Muslim leaders don't seem to be having much of a problem with it in terms of the genocide that's happening. If you got all these leftists and you got all these white Americans and MAGA who are now upset over American involvement in Gaza, the Muslim leaders are telling me that's not really a red line and it's not really compromising normalization of ties. What did Biden say before the elections in November? He said, you guys keep saying that Muslim leaders are angry over Gaza, but the Saudis are telling us they're ready to normalize as long as we give them nuclear technology and as long as we give them a NATO-style security agreement and as long as we give them support for Vision 2030. What's the message that they're receiving? When Francine Lacroix of Bloomberg interviews Netanyahu and says, how can you normalize with Saudi without a Palestinian state? And he laughs and he says, they're not mentioning it as much as you think they're mentioning it. It's not on the table as much as you think it's being presented on the table. When Netanyahu laughs at Erdogan and says to him that he calls me Hitler but expands the trade ties with me as well. He calls me Hitler during bad times, but during good times, but when he's in bad times, he comes running to me to try for better ties because he's stuck in the Mediterranean and he's stuck in his relationship with Israel and the like. When you see the UAE, who was Abdullah bin Zayed, who is repeating a position that even the Israelis are no longer saying, the Israelis are no longer saying the war ends when the hostages are released. They're saying we'll continue even if the hostages are released. Abdullah bin Zayed still hasn't got the memo. He's still saying the war ends when the hostages are released, essentially showing no regard whatsoever for what's happening in the Palestinians. My issue is that you don't need the armies to move. You just need these people to stop reassuring the genociders that it's not a red line. You need to stop these guys, these leaders, from telling the Israelis that I really want to have good ties with you, like the way bin Salman said in Politico. I want to have good ties with you, but I might be assassinated if I normalize right now because of the genocide. But I love you guys. I'd love to normalize ties. It's just my people are a bit angry right now because of your genocide. Now's not the right time to normalize. No, I can't normalize with genociders. Now's not the right time to normalize. And I think that's the issue that you have here, in that it's the sense of, if I believe that the armies need to mobilize, the armies don't need to mobilize. You've got so many tools at your disposal to end the genocide tomorrow, but you choose not to use it. Why? Because as far as the Muslim leaders are concerned, across the board, Gaza is not worth jeopardizing trade ties. Why would I compromise my trade relations with Israel for Gaza? It's almost as if the Muslim leaders are saying, what idiot would suggest that? How stupid are you to believe that I should cut ties with the Israelis over what? Genocide in Gaza. How stupid are you to think that I should jeopardize my relations with the genocide enablers in Washington for the sake of Palestinians? For them. Are you politically stupid? Are you politically dumb? Are you silly? You want me to jeopardize my population's ability to buy an iPhone for the sake of Palestine and Gaza. You want us, our currency, to be affected because of potential sanctions, because of Gaza. Then we will be unable to buy 3-bedroom homes. We'll have to buy 1-bedroom homes. What's wrong with you? Are you stupid? You want to compromise our way of life, our ability to get on trains easily, and our ability to go and buy and go to the shopping mall and to go and eat for the sake of Palestinians in Gaza? The Imam will say to you, you want me to jeopardize my Umrah and Hajj for Gaza, for Palestinians? You want to jeopardize my ibadah for the sake of a genocide in Gaza? It's not my responsibility. I don't want to call out the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for complicity in genocide. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go in front of the Saudi embassy and tell the Mohammed bin Salman, move and do something. You want to compromise my Umrah? I've got a group I need to take in the summer. I've got a group that I need to take. I make a lot of my money from it. Why should I jeopardize that for it too? Didn't the Prophet Muhammad say that the blood of the Muslim is dearer than the bricks of the Kaaba? The bricks of the Kaaba are dearer to me than the blood of the Muslim. He's flipped it. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Bin Salman is putting concerts in Jeddah while the Hajj season is going on. You don't need to denounce the munkar. Just say Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, and then go and make tawbah afterwards. Everything's become so twisted. Everything's become so twisted whereby to do what is good is called stupid and unwise, and to do evil is considered to be smart and clever and genius. It's like in Tunisia, I remember during the Arab Spring period, it was like, you know when you want to praise someone, you call him a wolf, a tha'lab, you call him a fox. And you're like, why is that praise? You're like, it's because he can do it and get away with it. We no longer celebrate people who do what's right because it's right. It's almost like we don't believe Allah will deliver us if we do something that is just and if we do something that is right. And that is why when you talk about the military armies, we're not even doing the basics yet. As Muslim rulers are not even doing the basics yet. We talk about boycott. There are Muslim nations setting their imams loose like rabid dogs on their population to say to their population, how dare you boycott without the permission of the ruler? How dare you boycott KFC? How dare you boycott Coca-Cola? Why would you do that? Why would you impact our economy? Why would you impact the economy of your brother who went and paid the franchise fee to Coca-Cola and now he can't get his money back? Surely you should be buying his Coca-Cola so at least the brother can get his money back. You're like, we're trying to get him to stop buying the Coca-Cola. Who gave you permission to do so? And the Imam gives you a khutbah over it about ta'at wali al-amr. And that's why I argue that the greatest allies of those who are complicit in the genocide are not liberals or secular. You've seen them here in the UK. You've been to the protests. Look at all these liberals and seculars who are protesting for Palestine. The greatest allies of those who are complicit in genocide are imams. Imams who are looking at those who are heartbroken and begging the rulers to do something for Gaza, and they're coming out and denouncing those people as people of fitna, and denouncing those people as people who are unwise politically, and people who have no idea how to respect the ruler and the like. Whereas the ruler is squandering the resources of the ummah while you watch our Palestinians get killed, while you watch our people, brothers and sisters get killed, while you watch them get slaughtered, their legs blown off, their heads blown off, entire villages burnt, you see it all being demolished, and you see the power the ummah has to stop it, and they choose not to do so because of wahan, because of comfort, because they desire to establish a comfortable economy. Because if you're going to tell me to fight for Gaza, show me a comfortable way to do it. Don't show me a way of struggle. He will read in the masjid about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He'll read with a Dajjalic eye. He will read how the whole life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a life of struggle in which he chooses the path of struggle in order to rescue you from dhulumat ila nur. He compromises his comfort in the dunya so we could be Muslim and go to Jannah. We all go sadaqallah al-azim and then we walk out of the masjid now looking with the other eye and saying, yeah, that's cool, but I'm not going to compromise my own comfort for Palestine and the like. And this is why I think that the reality is that the greatest allies of those who are complicit in genocide are imams who tell you that Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahr anil Munkar have now become fitna, that the bricks of the Kaaba are dearer than the blood of the Muslim, and who tell you that the ummah is weak, whereas the ummah has never been weak. Allah has always given it resources. It's always been about our willingness to deploy that resources. And that's why I think that the challenge today is, how do we get these resources back into the hands of the ummah? How do we break the Israeli border in Sirt? How do we break the Israeli border in Cairo? How do we break the Israeli border in Abu Dhabi? How do we break the Israeli border in Riyadh? How do we bring those borders back into those occupation borders so that we can restore the equilibrium of Palestinians versus the Israelis? Because as the map stands right now, the borders of Greater Israel span from Sirt in the west to Abu Dhabi in the east and to Jordan in the north. And I think that is the tragedy of what we're facing today.
I know I said that was the last point, but you mentioned something critical there, which is the fact that our resources have been plundered by these rulers who are allowing for the establishment of this greater Israel, as you mentioned. And we're left here looking at these rulers who do not want to work for the ummah, who have employed imams, as you said, in order to promote their projects. And the question is, okay, khalas arifna, we've understood these guys are not on our side. So what's the solution?
I want to read you this quote. I haven't memorized it entirely, but this is from Ali Izetbegovic. Ali Izetbegovic, who was the president of Bosnia, one of the great philosopher kings of our time. You know the hadith that your rulers come from the people. As you are, so your rulers will be. Your suggestion suggests that the rulers are not a reflection of the people, because the people are praying in the masajid while the rulers are fighting Islam. But I would argue that the rulers accurately reflect the people at this moment in time. And the reason why I say that is that I think that when it comes to the rulers reflect the refusal of the people to take a stand and to actually do something in order to push the ruler to do what is right. That when you tell somebody, let's do something for Gaza, let's do something for Palestine, he tells you, don't cause fitna, don't cause problems, don't cause that. And that's why Ali Izetbegovic said something, and this is what I mean about the people and how the rulers reflect the people. He said, a politician sometimes, against his own convictions, says things that are expected to be heard from him. True and intelligent messages are often unwanted, and the public would not accept them. That is how the wisdom of people having leaders they deserve is realized. The point that I'm saying is that the leaders are saying, do you want to be like Libya? Do you want to be like Syria? No, no. Then shush, shut up, go to the masjid, make your dua, make your prayer, do what you want, ask Allah as you wish, don't ask me. Ask Allah and do that in your own confines, and then go home and go to your day job and go to the entertainment facilities. I'm done. Don't you dare go publicly. And you have the mashayikh who say, okay, I'm happy with that. I will teach the story of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, how he goes and thrown into a prison, and the prison guard says to him, Ya Sheikh, do I have a share in what the oppression is doing? Because I'm only doing my job. And he says, yes, you have a share, because you are the enabler of what the oppressive ruler is doing. Ahmad ibn Hanbal says, you're not going to get away with it, even though you think you are a good man. You think you're not the one who's doing it. You're not going to get away with it because you are the handler. And the Imam says, look at the piety of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Then the fitna came to their door in Saudi Arabia. Bin Salman brought it to their door. And instead of being Ahmad ibn Hanbal, many of them turned around and said, Yahya bin Salman. God bless bin Salman. Please leave me alone, bin Salman, bin Salman. Ya Mujaddid, bin Salman, the new madhab of Saudi Arabia. Suddenly there was a panic. So bin Salman reflects that type of Imam.
But also a lot of Imams were put in prison.
They were put in prison. And the Imams outside who still had the capacity to convince people to stand with them, and the people who should have gone to rescue those Imams, the people who should have taken a stance, they didn't. Do you know what Ibn Khaldun argues? I used to have this dilemma when I was a kid. I used to say to myself as a teenager, why did Allah destroy Muslim nations when these Muslim nations had a masjid on every corner? These Muslim nations had lights on the streets for Ramadan. These Muslim nations had all had Quran competitions with the most beautiful recitations. Why did Allah destroy these nations? Because at no point were these ever shut down. They had all these masajid. What did they lack that meant Allah allowed these nations to be destroyed? If you read Ibn Khaldun's book Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun has his theory that al-adlu asasul mulk wal-dhulmu mu'dhinun bi kharab al-umran. Justice is the foundation of dominion, and oppression heralds the destruction of civilization. This brings back to the point we were talking about the Qataris, about should I say something, should I not say something? Ibn Khaldun argues that, and I'll start with Ibn Taymiyyah's quote before Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Taymiyyah said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will preserve a kafir state that is just, but will destroy a Muslim state that is unjust. Because he argued, Ibn Taymiyyah said, that Allah can tolerate kufr with justice, but will not tolerate Islam with injustice. Allah will not allow Islam to exist alongside injustice. Islam is too pure for that. Ibn Khaldun argues that al-adlu asas al-mulk, justice is the foundation of all dominion, and oppression, a dhulm, oppression mu'dhinun bi kharab al-umran. Oppression is what destroys a civilization. Ibn Khaldun argued that the success of a Muslim nation depends on a balance, in that rulers by nature will transgress and overstep their mark because power naturally results in ghurur in the heart. The way you protect yourself from that is, or protect the society from the over excesses, is that the people are the ones who stand guard. Amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. It's the people who restrict the ruler from overexcess. So he argued, a nation survives when there's a balance between the ruler's excesses and the extent to which a people are pushing back against the excess. As long as there is this continuing wrestling match, and as long as that wrestling match, you know when two people are pulling on a rope, as long as that rope is balanced, the forces are equal that are pulling on this rope, the nation stands. He said, but when people decline to uphold their responsibility for Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, the ruler's oppression starts to increase, and it starts to grow, and it starts to go. And the more the people refuse to do so, the more the nation starts to bend over until people and the ruler are destroyed. And he argued the reason the people are destroyed as well is because the people are also guilty for not doing anything to stop the ruler's excesses. And that's why Allah says, إِيَشَأْ يُذْهِبُكُمْ وَيَأْتِ بِخَلْقٍ جَدِيدٍ. What does Allah say? He says that if Allah so desires, He will remove you and replace you with another people. Allah is not talking about rulers here. Allah is not saying, إِيَشَأْ يُذْهِبُكَ, singular, to a ruler. إِيَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ, plural, jama', talking about a people. What is Allah saying? He's saying the obligation is on the people to restrict the ruler from excesses. And if you choose not to do so, Allah will remove you unjust people who allowed the excesses and bring a new people and tell them, are you willing to stand against the unjust excesses? So when your question implies that the people are innocent of what their ruler is doing because the people are doing nothing, I'm saying the people who do nothing are just almost as guilty as the one who is committing the oppression from the ruling barracks, from the ruling palace. Because the famous story about the people of Saturday, the Ahlul Sabt, is that Allah told them you're not allowed to fish on the Saturday. So a group of people left their nets out on the Friday. A group of people did nothing, they were neutral. They didn't fish, but they didn't tell the people, don't fish. And a group of people said, this is haram what you're doing. Stop it. This is wrong. This is unjust. Stop. Don't do this to him. Don't hand him over to the Saudis. Don't execute Turki al-Jasir. Don't, etc. Allah punished two of those groups, not one. Allah didn't punish the people who went to fish, didn't go and punish the people who did the oppression. Allah punished one other group. Who were the other group? It's the people who said it's nothing, who did nothing, who said it's nothing to do with me. These were people who believed in Allah, by the way. So they were doing their religious obligations. They believed in Allah. They were doing their obligations. Allah still destroyed them. Why? They were doing their obligations but not preventing the injustice and excesses that were taking place in society. The Egyptian says what Sisi is doing is none of my business. Sisi does what's based on Sisi operates in a domain that you allow him to operate in. Now they will reply and say that the price of resisting is too high. That's what they will say. The price of resisting is too high, and that's where the wahan comes in. It's not that the price is too high. It's that the struggle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you've looked at that and said, that's not me. You've looked at Nuh alayhi salam struggling for 900 years and you've said, that's not me. You've looked at Musa alayhi salam struggling over and over and you said, that's not me. You've looked at Yusuf alayhi salam and you said, that's not me. Only when he's al-Aziz, that's me. But the path to get there, that's not me. You've looked at Musab ibn Umair dying in the battle of Uhud. He converted Yathrib to Medina, but he didn't see the conquering of Mecca. You've said, that's not me. You've looked at Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha. She's killed before the Prophet ﷺ can even give da'wah in public. And you've said, that's not me. That's a footnote death. You've looked at Hamza, Asadullah. Out of respect, you said, I love him because he's Ahl al-Bayt. But radiallahu ta'ala, he dies in Uhud. You said, that's not me. You've looked at all of those who came after the conquering of Mecca. You said, that's me, because that's after the struggle. I don't want to be part of the struggle. And that's what I mean when I say that the most terrifying thing about Palestine, and I promise this is where I finish, is not that Palestine will be destroyed. Allah has given a promise it's going to be free. I have no doubt in Allah's promise. Palestine is going to be free. I am absolutely certain of that. My greatest fear is that Allah will not give us the honor of being a generation that contributes to it. Because when Allah called us to the struggle, we refused to engage in that struggle. Because we were unwilling to compromise our comforts for it. I'm not saying people should go fight, which is why I said to you that I believe that there are ways aside from fighting that can end the genocide tomorrow. What I'm saying is, we need to be bolder in calling out those who are complicit. We need to do Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. We need to tell the Saudis that they need to do something about Mohammed bin Salman. We need to do something about Sisi. We have to do something about Haftar. We have to do something about these rulers, about the King of Bahrain. We have to do something about these rulers, about Mohammed bin Zayed. We have to do something about these rulers who are colonizing us in favor of the Israelis, who are chaining us at the expense of the Palestinians, who are saying and deploying power against us to protect colonizers and oppressors. We have to be an ummah that stands for justice, because the greatest tragedy is not that they will win. Allah will punish those who are oppressors. Allah will punish those who are complicit in genocide. Allah will punish those. Allah will drag them on their faces Yawm al-Qiyamah in front of Hind Rajab and in front of Sidra. And Allah will say, they will say to Allah, Allahumma, I have a story to tell you. Let me tell you about what these people did to me, and let me tell you about those who abandoned me. And Allah will give them all justice on that day. Allah will give justice. I have no doubt about it. The greatest fear that every Muslim should have is, am I doing enough to get away from a punishment like those who were punished for being neutral? Am I doing enough where Allah will spare spare me when Allah brings those who were complicit in genocide? Will Allah line me up with them, or will He give me the reward for trying with the efforts and with the abilities and capabilities that I had? Allah will give victory to the Palestinians. Allah will punish the oppressors. When that moment comes, you don't want to be the guy who did nothing. You want to be the guy who kept moving and kept mobilizing even when it seemed futile, because you knew Allah's victory would come, and you wanted to have your book ready to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to say, Allahumma, I knew your promise was coming, I never doubted, and so I kept moving regardless of what everybody said.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Sami. There's so much more I want to talk about, I want to discuss, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have to end there. Jazakallah khair, and I hope you can join us again.
Barakallah fiqh. Thank you for having me.